Hello, this is Evan Brand, certified functional medicine practitioner and nutritional therapist operating worldwide via phone and Skype consults from evanbrand.com. Now, on to today's guest. Nikki Gratix is an award-winning nutritional therapist, bioenergetic and psychology practitioner, helping people to optimize their energy and overcome emotional stress and trauma. From 2005 to 10, she co-founded and operated one of the largest mind-body clinics in integrative medicine in the UK, with patients in 35 countries where she worked as the director of nutrition. She specializes in chronic fatigue syndrome, and the results with the patients at the clinic on the nutrition protocol she designed were later published in a British medical journal, which is pretty darn cool. In 2015, she hosted one of the largest ever summits, which was called the Abundant Energy Summit, where she had 29 experts. And Nikki speaks all the time on various summits. She's just so fun, such a wealth of knowledge, and just a great person overall. So can't wait to have her on this and share this interview with you. Enjoy. Nikki Gratix, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Evan. It's great to be here.
So fun to chat with you. We had a blast chatting off air, getting up to speed on the world of health and nutrition. So it's always fun to have an ally in this field because sometimes it can be lonely. This field of health and online business and entrepreneurship, sometimes you feel like, am I crazy because I'm so different than the rest of the world, clocking in and clocking out and watching nightly news and keeping up with all the sports? It's like I'm so disconnected from the normal reality because I'm in the health space. I don't know if you feel the same way at all.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, I didn't even realize it was a national holiday
Right.
on Monday. Like, I'm so disconnected. I just had clients. My clients were in like Germany and the UK, so they didn't care either. So I didn't even know that. But yeah, working from home as well. And I work a lot remotely, so you can very much be in your own bubble a little bit. So yeah, some of my best buddies are actually over the other side of the US or whatever, and we have most in common because we're living a similar lifestyle, right? So
right.
Yeah, I get it.
So last time I had you back on the show, I think it was probably, I don't know, the way time flies, maybe a year and a half ago, I got probably more emails from your podcast than so many others. I mean, I've dove so deep into functional medicine topics, and then I think, oh man, like this is a game changer. And then sometimes it's crickets. And then with your episode where we were chatting about traumas and the ACE score and stuff like that, which I want to get back into that today, I guess it's because you hit the emotional heartstring versus like the science piece. Like you're bringing stuff out of people with the work that you're doing that us just geeking out about bacterial infections, it's like, yeah, cool, but that doesn't hit home for people. But I think when we start digging into the stuff that we're going to get into today, these emotional stressors and traumas and the other things that are locked in the closet or locked in your subconscious, people resonate with that.
Yeah, even though I'm actually a geek too and using the science to explain some of it, but ultimately it comes down to, connecting with feelings, connecting with maybe things that we weren't aware of, things that we're dissociated from, that's actually sabotaging what we're doing to heal ourselves, whether it's healing the gut or whatever kind of illness that we have. So yeah, it's a big area. It's bringing science and the science and emotions together.
That's beautiful. So where do you start with people? Like for me, in comparison, I'm always looking into adrenal hormone function and testing for gut infections and looking for Lyme and co-infections and thyroid markers and things like that. And I'll ask about the ACE score. And, we'll briefly hit upon in the initial interview, like what are your previous childhood traumas and adverse childhood experiences and stuff like that. I'll recommend EFT and maybe some other resources that you've provided or someone else has provided in helping remove traumas. But beyond that, in terms of like the traumatic emotional piece, I don't go too much further. So I just want to know, like, what's your onboarding or your intake process for people?
Yeah, so I do look at all of those things that you're doing as well. So, I do assessment of adrenals, small intestine, large intestine, thyroid, immunity, all the things that you would, functionally assess for on the physical side. And I also look at all the environmental side. I'm really big into things like the circadian rhythms, home chemical cleanups, EMF cleanup, kind of all that side. But I'm just as deeply going into the psychology from the beginning. And it does take some practice and practitioner's skill to build up that. And I'll explain why. This is probably the most interesting thing we could touch on today. When we talk about trauma, a lot of people have heard of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the issue is the vast majority of trauma doesn't qualify for PTSD. So PTSD is usually something you get in response to a single event. And, you have things like avoidance to anything which triggers memories about the event that happened. It's usually a one-off thing. You might get sleep issues around it, hypervigilance, and so on. And we're talking about, we talked about this last time, there's huge amounts of epidemic levels of trauma, right? So 67% of all adults have had some level. That was an underestimate. And most people, trauma is intergenerational inherited as well. But the key thing is most trauma doesn't qualify for PTSD. It's actually developmental and attachment trauma, which is where most people have that type of trauma. And you could call it a relational or ambient type of trauma. And it's how people are engaging or not with their caregivers. So attachment trauma, for example, is not getting the right emotional bonding with the key caregivers. Now, the implications of that and there's a really interesting area called mirror neurons. So the brain doesn't develop in a vacuum. It develops in response to input from others. And at a very young age, the brain is very imprintable, right? So if mum isn't able to express empathy to you, you don't get empathy neurons, so you don't develop it. And if she doesn't pass it on to you, it's because she didn't get it from her mum. And it's not just communicated verbally, it's through the eyes, it's through an expression of emotional connection. So if you don't have that in you, you can't pass it on to your children. And the key thing is about attachment trauma is 50% of all adults don't attach. That's well known in attachment theory and in psychology, right? So what are the implications of that? This is going deep very quickly, but the implications are at least 50% of all adults, if they don't get proper bonding, and essentially you're just a ball of emotion. For example, before the age of 4, you're precognitive, you don't have the brain, hasn't come online yet. And there is bad energy around you, even if it's your mum feeling bad or your dad's feeling bad, or they're just disconnected from you, or they're not giving you that emotional connection. The baby will interpret that as, okay, this feels bad. I am bad. I must be wrong. So they're already starting with a degree of self-love deficit. And when that arises, they're already not getting unconditional love. And that's what triggers off all the sabotaging behaviors. So this is deep. This can be like, okay, if I'm not good enough just as I am, I'm going to have to earn it. So I become a super achiever. Okay, I'm not getting self-love. So now I'm going to become a overgiver, because the way I've learned to get love is by giving to everybody else. And that's how I get love. And then there might be another type, perfectionism. So if I just do it perfectly right, if I get it right every time, then I'll earn love. So, and all those types of strategies, that deeper stuff, it leads to all kinds of destructive health patterns, people not doing self-care. It leads to unresolved pain, so it leads to addictions as well, whether it's addiction to workaholism, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm already looking at my clients when they're coming in, I'm already looking at kind of who they are and how they're responding, even how they fill out the forms, how they're talking with me. Are they a people pleaser? Are they trying to please the practitioner? I'm aware of everything, and I can usually dig in quite quickly and help people to start to understand, like, can I give you an example?
Please.
Like a case. I'll give you a case study example.
Yes.
So here's an example where there's a woman that I was working with, and she'd had a stressful event. Everybody says, well, I had this big stressful event and then I got ill.
Yep.
And she had a big stressful event and she got fatigued and major back pain. Okay, this is her story. Okay, so I said to her, okay, so what actually happened? What was the stressful event? Now, bear in mind, stress in adulthood, it's not the stressor, it's your perception of stress. And you always see that in the science. It's not the event, it's your perception. But what sets up your perception? Why does one person collapse in response to stress and the other person is resilient and isn't really bothered? It's your childhood experience. So this woman, she said, well, I was working in this IT company, and they just absolutely piled on the work. I was doing 2 jobs. It was a total nightmare. It was terrible. And I said, okay, got it. So she got totally burnt out doing that. And I said, well, how are you feeling when that was happening? She said, oh my God, I felt overwhelmed. I felt helpless and, kind of hopeless. And I said, when was the last time? In fact, can you remember the first time you felt that in your life? And she said, and she just immediately, and this is a good way because it catches people without them filtering anything. She said, the first time I felt that was when my father was forcing us to read Bible studies, and I just didn't want to do it at all. I had no choice, so I pretended that I was blind. So what we did, what we unraveled, what we unpacked is that her parenting style that she'd been working with had taught her that she was helpless and powerless in response to authority because she had an overpowering parent. So in adulthood, in response to maybe, other people, maybe you or I, having an IT company that dumped 2 jobs on us, would have probably told the IT company where to stick the job, right? But you learn a sense of helplessness depending on your childhood upbringing. So that's why her illness didn't come from the stress. She says, I was stressed. Well, no, you didn't have resilience to the stress at the time because you learned a pattern and a way of being in childhood which set you up to have no, power and strength and resiliency in adulthood. So this is what you constantly see, and you kind of chase the energy by getting people to look at how they felt in adulthood. It's usually a representation of what happened in childhood, like reliving what happened in childhood.
That's a trip. I love the similarity that you and I have about where you talk about how they fill out the intake form. So the last question on my intake form is, do you know that you're awesome? And based on so it's like, it'll go from questions like this, like top 5 complaints, what's your sleep, how's sex drive? It's all these like serious, scientific, geeky type questions. How many cell phone towers are near your house? Do you turn off the Wi-Fi at night? Things like that. And then it's, do you know that you're awesome? And before I even get on that first call, I've already got a good read on this person based on the answer to that question. Some people will put like, believe it or not, this one lady, she put, this question is very trite. And I had to look up the word trite. I was like, I haven't heard the word trite since I was probably in like, dictionary study class or something. So just for the listeners, trite, the definition is overused and consequently of little importance. So basically she's saying my question sucks and she didn't like it. So she didn't answer the question. I thought, wow, this is going to be a fun, interview. I have to loosen her up a bit. And then you compare and contrast that to someone who answers the question, do you know that you're awesome? Something like, yes, and so are you, or hell yes, I am, or of course I am, or I'm working on it, or totally, or I'm almost there, or if I can get my energy back, I'll be awesome. And it's just so interesting because I'm giving people the opportunity to kind of reveal themselves, I guess, in a way.
It is. And this is important because, we've talked about the ACE score, this adverse childhood events score, which is, a test. It's a questionnaire of how much trauma you've had in childhood. Part of the issue is if you say like, did you experience emotional trauma and neglect in childhood, you just ask a superficial question like that, you're going to get a superficial answer. And so the one thing I'm focusing a lot on these days is emotional neglect. It's so epidemic because we're not living in an emotionally aware society. And emotional neglect, people are disconnected from their feelings, their needs, their wants, and that is leading to sabotaging behaviors. So, and it's not something, how can you know because you see, it's not what happened in childhood, it's what didn't happen. So you often do have to feed back to somebody, you kind of have to ask certain questions to dive in deeper so that they start to realize, wow, did somebody regularly ask you on a daily basis how you feel when you were growing up? Who did you feel safe with to tell your innermost things, as growing up? So you have to sort of go deeper and ask these more revealing questions, or actually guide people into looking at certain things to help them connect with feelings that they sort of have this aha moment of, I had one recently where she realized that she always would eat too much. She knew she had this craving for food. And she knew it was emotional. I ruled out everything else. Like, it wasn't blood sugar control. It wasn't because she was having just a neurotransmitter imbalance and that was causing, carb cravings. There was something else going on. And essentially we worked out she was exhausted all the time. And we worked out that from childhood, she basically learned that she had to work her bones, to her bones on everything. And the only thing she had for her was food. So she never put other time together for doing other things, like receiving a massage, being able to go out for a walk and put those boundaries in place, have things that fed her soul. She had Zip, which kind of just fed her soul. So we resolved the food craving because she suddenly went, oh my God. And, and then she looked back, she went, oh my God, I was always made to feel guilty for receiving.
Wow.
Right?
So let me get this straight. So part of your protocol was just integrating self-love, self-care, blocking out time for herself, maybe getting a massage, and then all of a sudden the needle moved and then she was able to overcome that.
Oh God, yeah. I got her to write a list of 5 to 10 things that she would love to receive on a daily, weekly basis, and make sure she had at least one of those every day. And it was totally life-changing. It's totally life-changing doing things like that. And I work a lot with fatigue people, so they're usually doing some kind of thing that is depleting them. Some of them don't know how to relax. It's like common sense isn't common practice.
Yeah.
You often see that. And then when you dig into, remember that all external behavior is driven by an internal feeling state. The feeling comes first. We don't just do things with no reason. The motivation, like why is somebody doing something or not doing it, is emotional. So if you want to get compliance for people to do things like circadian rhythm management, go to bed at 9 o'clock, do good things that they know feeds their health and also their soul. So fun things like fun. I mean, that has just been filtered out of society, hasn't it? So you actually want to get them to examine how they feel about those things and why they're not doing it. The why is the key. So once you tap into that, you can tap into an emotional resource they've been running on empty all this time, not giving and receiving to themselves. So in my work, I found that's hugely important, especially for sustainability as well. So, you can get somebody really hyped up and motivated to do a protocol, but you want them to integrate it as a way of being. So they're not coming back 6 months later saying, I put the weight back on or I'm fatigued again. So you can only do that by getting into the deeper core issues of who they feel they are in the world and how to receive and how to relax and those kind of things. And it does take some renegotiation. Sometimes they need to put new boundaries in place and they're going to need to communicate with people around them about that, which can, that's another aspect of it. Like, how do you communicate to your husband when you're telling him that you're going to go and do this thing that you've never done before? So that comes up too. But it's a core part of, I spend a lot of time working on that stuff with people, especially those with fatigue related illnesses.
I think we need to trade intake forms. I'd love to read your initial questioning, because I've got a question on mine too that says, do you have fun in life? I think I need to change the question because typically I only get a yes or no answer. And I would say 80% of the time, the answer is just flat out no explanation. Just, do you have fun in life? In all caps, no. And that's it. So I think I need to reword the question, because I think that I'm getting close to what you're talking about, pulling that aspect out. Like, are you actually enjoying this life or not? But I think I need to restructure it or somehow probe deeper into that.
That's very true. I haven't done apart from the fact that I do get people to work out their Enneagram type. It's partly to inform them. Like I kind of, it's like, oh, that's interesting to see what type they are. But the Enneagram is the personality typing system. It's the Enneagram Institute. It's one of the only personality typing systems that goes into the emotional aspects, like not just categorizing by external behavior, but the why someone does what they do.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So like the Myers-Briggs test, you're saying that's not as valuable as the Enneagram?
I tend to work with the Enneagram more, okay. Yes, because I want to get to the emotional core of where people are at. So, and they can do the quiz online, and I encourage them. They'll learn just from doing the quiz and then reading the personality types. They'll go, oh my God, I fit really into being a type 1 perfectionist, or I'm a type 2 overgiver, or I'm a type 3 achiever, or I'm a type 6 anxiety type. So each type it's coming from how we our strategy of surviving in life that came from usually something we didn't get in childhood, which is unconditional love, one way or the other. And then we have a strategy of like trying to do it through being right all the time, trying to do it by achieving, by all these different ways that, you know, people are trying to earn love. So it's like, why don't you just give all that, accept that you're already lovable inherently, and then you'll actually be able to feel happy in receiving, and your health will get better. You know, I should say as well, Bessel van der Kolk, who's amazing, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, he's the world leading expert in trauma. He's like professor of psychiatry at Boston Medical School. And this is just something, as we should connect this to the gut. And it's something that people should bear in mind. Your gut also doesn't exist in like in a vacuum. It's not existing in isolation. And, you know, if you have a self-love deficit, that's not a safe space to be in. So you're going to have a change in how you feel in terms of a sense of safety. If you have to earn, you know, you're not inherently feeling that you're lovable and you're already like all the time. This is how people get stuck in survival mode, right? So one of the things that Bessel van der Kolk was brilliant when he said in his book, which is a book called The Body Keeps the Score, he's talking about trauma when he says the body keeps the score. Because he's essentially saying that when you're traumatized, and it can come through attachment trauma, like you mentioned, you're not just traumatized mind, you're a stressed organism. You're a stressed organism. Everything's connected. So everything changes. So in response to this external ambient trauma that's gone on for years of you just never receiving something that you should have got, and you can't quite work what it is. It's one of the classic symptoms of emotional neglect. You kind of don't really know how you feel. You kind of just think there's something kind of missing. You can't always articulate how you feel. It's just, you know, something's not quite right. That is traumatizing. It creates this, people get into a survival state. Everything changes. So we've got the studies that show that early life separation in monkey experiments and rat experiments changes the gut colonization. It causes intestinal permeability. The studies directly with the mammals have been done. But it's so much more than that. It changes the HPA axis, the glucocorticoid receptors, the epigenetic expression changes so that you have a lower threshold response to stress. So now you need less of a stressor to have a stress response, and your stress response will last for longer. Those were landmark studies done. You're more likely to trigger the cell danger response, which is a mitochondrial shutdown self-protection mechanism. Turns out the mitochondria doesn't just produce ATP, it's actually also sensing if there's a threat. And this is Dr. Robert Navio's work, president of the Mitochondrial Medicine Society. I think he's awesome. I'm studying his stuff a lot because it's all fatigue related. And he said early life stress can trigger the cell danger response. And the cell danger response is the mitochondria shutting down as a self-protection mechanism. So now you've got no energy. And the immune system skews, reduction in ability to fight off bugs and viruses, while also having increased reactivity to metals, chemicals, foods. You know, so it's one system and one thing changes after the other. Endocrine, immune system, gut, brain, the glial cells go crazy and start pruning neurons. So that's long term. They think that links to Alzheimer's when people have trauma. So, you know, if you're in a fight-flight response, your cells are listening. Your HPA axis has changed in response to that. So this self-love thing is kind of a big deal. If you don't see it feel safe in the world, and by the way, only 50% of that may be conscious to you. This is why I just think, you know, you can do a lot to, I totally work on the physical side to correct these things, and you should. And, you know, you do want to take the gut bacteria, you do want to, you know, intervene, balance the thyroid, do all this stuff with nutritional and dietary interventions. But the more that you can get into a sense of safety, come out of survival mode, however that is manifesting for you, is kind of fundamental as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's so much great info. I don't want to oversimplify it, but are you saying, if I could try to put all of that into one nutshell or one pillar, it's getting people to tone their parasympathetic nervous system and try to mimic something like a hunter-gatherer would have had, which would have been a parasympathetic state the majority of the time. And maybe 1% of the time there's a bear or a tribal member gets hurt or something that's got to set off fight or flight maybe 1% of the time, versus the modern person, which is 99% fight or flight. And even that 1% of the time when they go on vacation, they still bring their iPad and check the emails the whole time. Is that a safe simplification of what you just said?
Yeah, you're getting close. Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting that it actually, I would say it's more about oscillation and the ability to move into, sometimes we do need a stress response,
Right.
and we want to be able we need to launch the stress response when it's appropriate, but then we need to be able to pull out of that. So it's an oscillation all the time. And like everything oscillates in nature, the seasons oscillate. And what we do is we don't oscillate enough. We need to be able to go into the stress response and then go into deep relaxation. We need to be able to go into deep focus, get work done, be effective in what we're doing, and then are we able to release and deeply relax? What's happening is you end up being sort of flatlining in both, so you can't oscillate. That's the loss of resiliency, a lack of being able to launch an appropriate stress response. The other thing I would just mention as well, because it's a big expansion of understanding, just about the vagus nerve. There's two parts to the vagus nerve. There's the dorsal aspect and the ventral. And what we want is the ventral. So we've had a little bit of oversimplification about the fight-flight response versus nice rest, digest, detoxify parasympathetic side. The parasympathetic side has two sides, and this is Stephen Porges' work on polyvagal theory, where he's basically said, look, the dorsal side of the parasympathetic side of the nervous system is the most ancient part. It's kind of like reptilian based. That is the freeze response. It's shutting down. It's a shutdown mode. It's a metabolic shutdown mode. And what we actually need to do is we need to tone the vagus nerve. We want the ventral side. The ventral needs to be triggered, it's like the trigger of the oxytocin. It's the social state. It's where you feel slightly high when you get into a ventral vagus nerve state. You kind of feel like there's nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to go. You're just sitting on your porch, totally happy. It's kind of the place where we're always trying to get to with meditation, right?
How do we tone that other section of the vagus nerve? What does that involve? I know you mentioned that that's what we're trying to achieve with meditation. Is it meditation that's going to help us achieve that? Is it the float tanks? Is it massage? Is it cuddling? Is it sex? What do you do?
So this is a good question. So to stimulate the ventral side, there are actually quite a few different types of exercises. And there's a brilliant book called The Healing the Vagus Nerve by Stanley Rosenberg. It's a book that I actually recommend. And it's Stephen Porges who came up with the polyvagal theory that's actually really, it should be really it is revolutionizing the trauma understanding, but it should revolutionize our understanding of stress. Things like there's a kind of interesting exercise that Stanley Rosenberg recommends in his book where you keep your head straight, you put your hands behind the back of your head, and you actually move your eyes to the right without moving your head. Look your eyes all the way over to the right, hold it there for 30 seconds, and then do this to the left. And amazingly, it actually modulates the vagus nerve. I can actually give you a handout on that, and you can have people give it a shot at home. It literally takes like 30 seconds. So there's different things that you can do. You can actually get vagus nerve stimulators as well. You might have seen there's people like Dave Asprey's been doing cold water face therapy. You'll see that on Dave Asprey does that quite a lot. Also stimulates the good side of the vagus nerve. Yes, there's quite a few different things to do out there, but it's not, meditation may not, if somebody's in a sort of freeze shutdown state, there may be other exercises they actually need to do. Like it's not just doing constant things that just switch off the sympathetic side. If you feel yourself going into fatigue, depression, that side of things, you might want to also, by the way, look at therapies around, are you actually in a freeze response? Cranial sacral therapy is also a great type of therapy to help deal with that. Sometimes it can actually be trauma related. So we're in a traumatized state where we had a shutdown response. So sometimes it may be, exploring that with a therapist as well, like unpacking that and helping someone through a particular event to help them release the fear that and the reasons they shut down in the first place. But yeah, it's a fascinating area. And he's got more exercises in the book. But it's a big breakthrough in understanding. A lot of us who specialize in the stress area, that there's fight, flight, and freeze response to trauma, not just fight, flight, and parasympathetics like the be all and end all. So there's a little bit more to it.
That's amazing. I want to just spend a few minutes chatting about the energy piece. I know we talked a bit about the whole trauma gut piece, but what do you see as the other or major energy drainers of people? I know you hit on, kind of the emotional component. You hit on the mitochondrial component. There's the gut component. What else is it? Is it energy vampires, people that these people are dating or that they're married to? Like, what would you say the other big, how you get into your protocols, and you're like, you know what, every client, I'm going to make sure that we check this and this and this and this off the list
Yes.
as a source of energy drain. What does that list look like for you?
Yes, so this is a really good question. Definitely on the psychology and emotional side, the drainers are definitely where somebody's not doing self-care because they internalize these messages from key caregivers. So lack of self-love is going to lead on to this survival mechanism all the time. That's incredibly draining. You can also end up attracting people around you who aren't supportive of you being in a good state. And there's landmark studies showing, like, of over 300,000 people kind of showing the issues about isolation and poor relations with others is a greater indicator of whether you're going to survive or not than things like your BMI, how much you exercise, and like smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So it's a massive one. And that includes like just even your support groups, who you're hanging out with, what movies you watch all the time. Like, some of these movies are absolutely terrible, like the really violent stuff and negative messages. That stuff goes in. And so when I'm doing an environmental cleanup, I include what are the cultural beliefs that you have. So definitely that's a huge part of it. The other thing I would say, people need to be careful, especially if they're in a chronic complex illness state, fear. So fear of treatment, fear of having certain symptoms. Like if you get terribly afraid of crashing, or you're getting into a huge fear state about trying new things, and it happens a lot with, again, maybe it's a little bit more with the chronic fatigue side, but that's a terrible cycle that's self-perpetuating that people get stuck in, because it is, it's terrifying actually getting a chronic complex illness, especially if you lose your job and your whole life has been affected by it. So people can get traumatized by that. But the thing that will perpetuate it is chronically then having a huge fear about having certain symptoms, about approaching treatment. It's, is a total like self-perpetuating thing, and we need to get people out of that. A huge drainer. I mean, it's just, if you don't get over that, So the other things like non-emotional stuff, in terms of what the energy drainers are, like what people are lacking, I would say in a massive amount, sunlight. I think sunlight, being outside and nature. This, it's so basic, and yet it's so like circadian rhythm management is one of the most profound things that affects everything. Hormone production. It turns out we need light for so many things. So sunlight and time in nature. And of course, as soon as you say that, half of the people's kind of illnesses can be explained by just not managing that side properly and not getting enough sunlight. I don't know if that's your experience as well.
Oh my God. That's why I'm building a house in the middle of the woods, so I can be outside and hang out in the woods all day and play in my garden and all that. So yeah, and I used to work outside for a living too. I used to work in the park system where I was outside 40 hours a week. This was my career, being outside and being in the woods.
Yes.
And so when I left and I went to go work for a supplement company, I destroyed myself because I was under fluorescent lighting. I had no windows. Now, I would force myself to go outside and take my shirt off and spend an hour outside in the sunshine eating my lunch. But besides that, I was stuck inside, and my energy levels were so bad. It didn't matter how many B vitamins or adaptogenic herbs I would take, or mitochondrial boosters. It's like I'm deficient in vitamin N, nature, or vitamin S, sunshine. So
yeah, these are massive. Ever since I introduced the circadian rhythm management stuff, that's been gigantic. You can change somebody's adrenal profile just by sorting out their circadian management, actually getting them out in enough sunlight, using sometimes the lamps, the 10,000 lux light lamps and stuff, using those if they're not going to be able to get access to going outside. But usually I do get a lot of clients that are like, I need to leave my job. And I'm like, I didn't say that. They sort of come to their own conclusion of like, how do you want to set your life up to support you? Yeah. So can you imagine being in an office job, like you or I being like, I would rather be dead than do that.
I know. And God bless the people that do what they have to do to make society run. But I'll tell you, there's probably other options out there that you can seek out. So if you're listening to this and you've got a gut feeling that something ain't right and you're not going to be able to supplement your way out of this, then you may have to start considering that. And just on that note, I had a client today, actually. We got her retest back of her stool test. So we eradicated several infections. She had multiple parasites, multiple autoimmune triggering bacteria, including Klebsiella and several others. And she had H. pylori as well. We got rid of all that. And she said, but my symptoms aren't changing. My energy levels are the same. And her job, she edits TV shows. So I'm guessing I didn't get the full details on the work environment, but she said she's surrounded by EMF. I'm guessing, big monitors and big boards where they're tweaking volume levels and things like that. I'm guessing it's probably dark so that you can see the proper color of the show, and you need to modify the color and do adjustments to that. So I'm guessing think of it probably like an old school photo cave, like how people would develop film in the dark and such. I'm guessing and picturing, just based on her description, it's something like that. And she's like, well, I love my job though. She's like, we can't even talk about that. I'm not ready to talk about that. I want to keep working on the gut. And it's like, okay, I'll put it on the back burner. But she said she was with a functional medicine practitioner for about a combination. I think she was with multiple. I'm sure it's the same story for you. They've been to multiple practitioners before they get to you. It's been 6 years. She's done all the good work. Now, she still had infections and adrenal problems. We're working on those. But it's like at a certain point, the functional medicine piece can take you so far. But as you mentioned, the emotions, the trauma, the work environment, if you're surrounded by tons of EMF and it's a dark room and you're getting no real or bright light in your eyes, your circadian rhythm's toast. I can't give you enough ashwagandha or rhodiola or licorice in the world to fix it.
It's so true. I've had that with clients as well, where they want the pill, they want the diet, and they're actually really compliant. They're amazing, and they
That's
do
right.
everything, and they do the testing. They've got the money because they usually got the job,
Right.
the job which is paying the bills for all the functional medicine testing. But then it's like I had one where she was a particular client was a senior tax advisor, but she was just in the office all day. She wouldn't even go out at lunchtime. I was just even trying to do that. She lived in Santa Monica. I'm like, are you kidding? You could go out for an hour in bright sunshine. Like many parts of the world, you can't even do that. And even that, she was like, couldn't get her head around it. And it was, it's kind of sad to say it, but sometimes people aren't sick enough yet.
Yes.
They're not sick enough to actually finally get it, that you really do need to address it, or something will happen where another crisis will happen where it comes to the point that circadian rhythm management it's a critical one, because it does require a proper lifestyle change. And some people, if they're just so busy and into their job and they don't realize it yet, they'll get it at some point. I've usually seen so many practitioners where I've heard stories when they were in that type of job, and then the practitioner they were seeing for their health issues was saying, you really need to change your job. And they were like, are you kidding? They were so like, I'm not ready to change my job. What are you, stupid? Trying to change, say I've got to leave my job. Are you kidding? Because they weren't ready to hear it yet. Exactly. And then there they are 7 years later, a practitioner telling these other people that you really need to think about changing your job. So yeah, it's a process, right?
Yeah, I'm sure we could go for hours. I know we got to wrap this up. I had so much fun. I feel like we barely scratched the surface. I know we went deep and then we kind of zoomed out. And at the end of the day, people are probably like, oh man, I want the super geeky biohacks. And it's like, get outside, get some sunshine, fix your circadian rhythm, go to bed on time. You can't skip that. It's not optional.
So true. I cannot tell you. Yeah, that is in my it's in my course that I'm writing. Go to bed. If you really want to have amazing energy, go to bed at 9 p.m. Be in bed. Don't eat 3 hours before that. Get your blue blocking glasses on, or turn all your bulbs orange. Get sunlight in the first 30 to 90 minutes on waking. Get more sunshine later in the day. That's foundational. Eat a diet that manages your blood sugar. Kind of this kind of thing. So on the psychology side, people can explore. I give people a few practical tips. There's a brilliant book called Running on Empty by Dr. John East Webb for emotional neglect. It's a tip for people. This is what I would do with clients, get them to explore. And you can also go and do your Enneagram type. Just do the quiz online, and it starts the process of an exploration process. So people can start to see oh, actually, that's me. That's totally describes me. And people have many aha moments, and it helps them break through to be able to change their lifestyle so that it becomes more self-nurturing and receiving, and so that they can balance that out as well. So hopefully we give them some stuff that people can practically do as well.
Beautiful. Do you do the Enneagram on the intake form? Is that something you require of all new clients so you can learn their Enneagram?
Yes, I actually tell them to give me their results. So they go onto the website to do that, and then they come back and say, this is my Enneagram type. And I sort of use that along with then how I feel with them. I connect with them like intuitively and emotionally. And
sweet. Yeah. Well, I'm adding that to my intake. I feel like I want to know more because I figure out their personality over time just naturally. But if I can get an even more, like, what do you call it? A little more clinical, like, boom, here's what they are. I think that's going to help me elevate my skills with people. So that's awesome.
Great.
Well, thank you, Nikki. You're awesome. And we'll send people back to your site. Where can they go? I know you've got multiple things that you're up to. Where's your hub?
Just go to nikkigratrix.com. That's NIKIGRATRIX.com. And everything's there.
And I'll have to listen back. It's like, okay, this book, you've gave so many good resources. Most people aren't that resourceful. It's like all about me. You're like, you know what? Look, I need to tell you about others so that you can learn. If you hear a practitioner and they don't recommend other resources, I get kind of freaked out. It's like, oh, so you're the only guru I need to know? Really?
Yes.
But you're like, you know what? There's a million other resources that you need to add on top of my knowledge. So I love that about you. And Nikki, I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for our friendship, and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. I feel the same way. It was awesome. Really enjoyed myself.
Take care.